The sun was falling low, stretching gold across the endless plain. The air was still, the kind that made even the horses quiet. He stood by the gate, a man carved by the land, strong, silent, and alone. Years of dust and sun had shaped him. The ranch was all he had left, and that was enough, or so he told himself. He wiped the sweat from his brow and leaned on the post. The sound of the wind was the only voice he ever heard these days. It carried old memories, laughter that had long faded, promises that had turned to echoes. He didn't like to think much anymore. Thinking hurt more than the work did. Then he saw movement. Far down the trail, a shape in the heat. A rider or maybe someone on foot. He squinted against the glare. Strangers rarely came this far, not unless they were lost or running from something. The figure drew closer, slow, uneven. A woman. Her hat tilted low, coat covered in dust, one hand gripping her side like she'd been hit. He didn't move at first. He'd seen trouble before. Trouble usually came wearing the same tired face, desperate eyes, a shaking voice, and a story that never quite added up. But something about her was different. She walked like she'd run a long way, like stopping wasn't part of the plan. She stopped at the fence, breathing hard. "Water," she said. Her voice cracked, soft but steady. He nodded toward the trough and said nothing. She drank like she hadn't in days. Then she looked up at him, and in that moment something passed between them. Not words, not trust, but something else. Something quiet. He was about to turn away when she spoke again, this time softer, almost to herself. "Wait, I take it off." The words hung in the air, strange and heavy. He froze, unsure what she meant. His hand stayed near his belt, just in case. She reached for the collar of her coat. Her fingers trembled. The wind died completely, as if the land itself wanted to watch. He had no idea what was about to happen, but he knew somehow that whatever came next, it would change everything. Morning came slow over the plains. The light crept across the hills, spilling gold over the fences, the corral, and the wide, empty yard. The rancher moved through his morning the way he always did, quiet, steady, never rushing. He poured coffee that tasted like smoke and memory, sat on the porch, and listened to the same silence that had followed him for years. It was his kind of peace, hard-earned and a little lonely. He had built the ranch from almost nothing. Just him, a few acres of land, and a will that refused to break. The house was small, the barn smaller, but it was enough. Every board, every post, every patch of fence carried the marks of his hands. Out here, he didn't need much. Just a roof, a horse, and a reason to get up before dawn. Sometimes, though, when the nights got too quiet, his thoughts would wander. He'd think about the years before the land hardened him, before the world stopped feeling kind. There had been a woman once. A smile that reached through every wall he'd built. But that was a long time ago. The war took her, or maybe it was just life that took her and never gave her back. He stopped asking questions after a while, so he stayed. He worked. He mended fences and broke horses. He watched seasons pass like old friends who never stayed long. The wind carried stories from towns miles away, stories of railroads, outlaws, and gold. But none of that reached here. Here the world was simple. Hard, but simple. The day she arrived had started like any other. He was checking the water troughs, fixing a post that the storm had snapped, when he saw that faint trail of dust rising in the distance. At first he thought it was a rider passing through, maybe one of the cattlemen from the next county. But as the figure came closer, he saw no horse. Just a person, walking, stumbling, the kind of walk that meant trouble. He almost went back to work. Folks had their own business, but something made him wait. Maybe it was the way she didn't stop, even though she looked half dead on her feet. Or maybe it was just the silence, how it suddenly felt too heavy, too still, like the air itself was holding its breath. By the time she reached the gate, the sun was high and she could barely stand. Her coat was torn, dust clinging to her face and hair. Her boots looked ready to fall apart. She didn't ask if she could come in. She just looked at him and said, "Water." He pointed, said nothing. She drank, slow at first, then all at once, like she'd forgotten what it felt like to be alive. When she was done, She leaned against the post and looked at him with eyes that didn't match the rest of her, soft eyes, full of something old. Pain, maybe, or fear. He wanted to ask what happened, where she came from, but words didn't come easy to him anymore. So he just watched. She didn't seem scared of him. Most strangers were. Out here, a man alone meant danger or desperation. But she looked at him like she already knew he wasn't either. "Long way from town," he finally said. She nodded slow. "Too long." Her voice was rough but steady. She didn't sound like she was running. She sounded like she'd already run too far. Then came the moment that stuck, the one that still hung in the air even after she stopped speaking. "Wait," she said. "I take it off." He didn't move. Just stared, trying to make sense of the words. She reached up, fingers trembling, and undid the clasp of her coat. The wind caught the edges, lifting the dust off it. He should have turned away. A decent man would have, but something kept him still. He couldn't look away, couldn't even breathe right. It wasn't the way she looked, it was the way she moved. Slow, careful, like she was peeling away something more than fabric. When the coat slipped from her shoulders, he saw it. A badge, worn, bent, but still shining in the sunlight. She wasn't a runaway, she was law. His gut tightened. A lawman, no, a lawwoman this far out alone meant one thing. Trouble close behind. He didn't say a word, but his mind raced. Outlaws, bounty hunters, revenge. Whatever it was coming. She caught the look in his eyes and spoke before he could. "Don't," she said. "Don't think what you're thinking. I ain't here for you." "I ain't done nothing," he replied. "Good," she said softly. "Then maybe you'll help me." The words landed heavy. Help. It wasn't something he gave easily, not anymore. People had a way of taking what they needed and leaving the rest in pieces. But she didn't look like she was lying. She looked like she was holding on by a thread. He nodded toward the porch. "You can rest. Just till sundown." She hesitated, then followed him. Her steps were slow, unsteady. He poured her a cup of water, then sat across from her. The silence stretched, long and awkward. Finally she said, "You don't ask questions, do you?" "Not unless I need to." She almost smiled at that. "Good. Then maybe we'll get along." The way she said it, calm, tired, almost grateful, made something stir in him he hadn't felt in years. Maybe curiosity, maybe something deeper. He didn't want to think about it. The wind picked up again, brushing through the dry grass. He looked out at the land, the sky stretching forever. It all felt the same, and yet it didn't. There was a weight in the air now, a tension he couldn't name. She sat quiet, hands folded on her lap, eyes watching the horizon like she expected something or someone to appear. He poured another cup of water, more for himself than her. His hand trembled just enough to notice. Something about this woman, this moment, had cracked the stillness of his life wide open. And for the first time in years, he didn't know what was coming next. The evening came early that day. Clouds stretched across the sky like bruises, turning the light red and heavy. The woman sat by the small fire he'd built outside, her hands wrapped around a tin cup. She hadn't said much since she came. Neither had he. The silence between them wasn't empty, though. It was tight, like something waiting to break. He fed the fire, tossing in bits of dry wood. The flames cracked, the sound sharp in the quiet. He didn't look at her, but he felt her watching. Every so often, she'd shift her weight, wince a little, press her side where her coat had torn earlier. He'd seen that look before, someone running from pain, and not just the kind that bled. "You're hurt," he said finally, still staring at the fire. "I've had worse," she answered. "That don't make it better." "No," she said, her voice faint, "but it makes it familiar." He wanted to ask more, but something in her tone stopped him. She wasn't ready to tell him who she was or what she'd done. So he stayed quiet. He'd learned long ago that people talk when they're ready or when the dark gets heavy enough. The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound far off like thunder. But it wasn't thunder. He knew that rhythm too well. Hooves. Distant, maybe miles away, but moving steady. He stood up, eyes narrowing toward the west. Nothing yet, just the horizon and the dying light. Still, the sound settled in his gut like a warning. "You expecting company?" he asked. She froze. The cup stopped halfway to her lips. "No," she said too quickly. He turned to look at her. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes said something else. Fear, or guilt, or both. He stepped closer, the firelight flickering between them. "You brought trouble here, didn't you?" She didn't answer. Just stared into the flames like they might swallow her whole. After a moment she sighed, low and long. "Trouble was already behind me," she said. "I just ran faster for a while." He waited. "I worked for the marshal's office," she said finally. "Tracked men who didn't want to be found. Thought I was good at it too. Until one of them got closer than I expected." He didn't move. She went on, her voice low. "Outlaw named Briggs, meaner than most. He killed my partner last spring, then swore he'd find me next. I thought he wouldn't bother chasing me this far west. Guess I was wrong." The rancher let the words sink in. So that was it. The badge, the look in her eyes, the sound of hooves. "Briggs," he repeated. "You think he's the one out there?" She nodded slowly. "Him or his men, either way they'll come." He rubbed his jaw, thinking. "Then you best keep moving before they do." Her eyes lifted to his, steady now. "I can't," she said. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because what I took from him, he'll burn every acre of land to get it back." She reached into her coat, pulling out a small leather pouch, tied tight with twine. "It's not money. It's proof, letters, names, what he's done. Enough to bury him if I can make it back to Dodge." He stared at the pouch, then at her. "You're risking your life for that." "I already lost everything else," she said softly. "Might as well finish what I started." The fire popped, a shower of sparks jumping into the air. The wind carried them for a second before they faded into the dark. He sat down again, slow, the wood creaking under his weight. "You should have left him to the law," she laughed, not the kind that meant joy, but the kind that knew better. "The law doesn't reach men like him. Out here, he is the law." He didn't argue. He'd seen that kind of power before. A man with enough fear behind his name could bend anyone, sheriff, preacher, or rancher, if he wanted to. The sound of hooves came again, closer now. He saw it in her eyes before he heard it clearly. Her hand went to her revolver. "Stay down," he said. She shook her head. "He won't stop just because I hide." He stood, scanning the horizon again. Still no figures, just the faint echo of hooves in the distance. Could have been travelers, could have been worse. Out here it didn't matter much, it was better to be ready. He turned back to her. "You can stay the night. But if those men come, you ride east at first light. Don't argue." She met his eyes. "And what about you?" "I'll do what I have to." Something flickered in her face then, something between gratitude and guilt. "You don't even know me," she whispered. He looked toward the horizon, his voice calm. "Don't need to, I just don't like bullies." The air grew colder as night settled. Coyotes cried somewhere in the distance, a lonely sound that carried through the open land. She shifted closer to the fire, pulling the coat tighter around her. For the first time, she seemed small, fragile even. "You ever lose someone out here?" she asked after a while. He stared into the flames. "Yeah," he said. "Once." She didn't ask who. He didn't offer. Some stories weren't meant to be spoken aloud. The night dragged slow, the kind that made every noise louder, every thought sharper. Neither of them slept. She sat with her back to the barn wall, gun resting in her lap. He stayed by the gate, rifle across his knees, eyes on the horizon. Sometime after midnight he caught the faint glint of light far off, metal maybe, a signal. He couldn't be sure, but he felt it in his bones. They were out there, waiting. The woman must have felt it too. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared into the dark with that same quiet resolve. The rancher took a slow breath. He didn't ask her what she planned to do. He already knew. Somewhere deep down, he understood something he hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't just her fight anymore. Not after tonight. Not after those words. "Wait, I take it off." Because since she walked through his gate, he hadn't felt like a ghost anymore. And that scared him more than the men riding toward them. The next morning broke with a heavy silence. The kind that presses down on you makes the world feel smaller. The air was still, no wind, no birds. Even the horses seemed uneasy, shifting in the corral like they could sense what was coming. The rancher stood on the porch, coffee in hand, eyes on the horizon. The light hadn't fully risen yet, but he could see faint trails of dust in the distance. Someone was out there, moving slow, purposeful. He didn't say a word when she stepped out behind him. She looked different in daylight, the hard edges of her face softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. She didn't ask what he saw. She already knew. Her hand went to the pouch at her side, the one she'd kept close since the night before. "They're coming," he said quietly. She nodded. "I figured." He glanced at her, then back at the land. "How many?" "4, maybe 5, she said. "Briggs likes to keep his hands dirty but not his boots. He sends men first." He sipped the coffee and set the cup down slow. "You got a plan. Stay alive long enough to get to town." He almost smiled. "Ain't much of a plan. It's the only one that's ever worked." She started toward the barn, checking her revolver as she walked. He followed her, not because he had to, but because he couldn't just let her face this alone. He didn't owe her anything, not really. But something about her fight, that quiet fire she carried, reminded him of who he used to be. Before the land wore him down, before loss turned him cold. Inside the barn, she saddled one of his horses with the speed of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. He handed her a rifle. "You know how to use it." She gave him a look. "Better than most men I've met." He grunted. "Good." The morning light pushed through the cracks in the wood, cutting stripes of gold across her face. For a moment, she didn't look like a fugitive or a fighter. She just looked tired. Tired of running, tired of carrying the weight of something no one else would. "Why'd you take that pouch?" he asked suddenly. "You could have walked away." She stopped, her hand on the saddle. "Because if I didn't, more people would die. He's got half the county in his pocket, sheriffs, judges, bankers. Everyone who swore an oath forgot what it meant. Somebody had to remember." Her voice didn't rise, but it carried something stronger than anger. Conviction. He nodded slowly. "And now you're out here with no backup, no plan, and a man like Briggs on your trail." "I told you," she said. "It's familiar." The sound came again, hooves, closer now. The kind that rattles your chest before you even see the riders. She stiffened. He looked toward the ridge. "They'll see the ranch first," he said. "They'll think you came through and kept going. And if they don't, then they'll wish they had." She glanced at him, and for a brief second something like trust crossed her face. Not because she believed she'd survive, but because she believed he would stand beside her. They moved quick. He doused the fire, locked the corral, and checked the ammo box inside the barn. She took position behind the trough, low and steady. The sun was climbing now, painting everything in harsh yellow light. Then they saw them. 5 riders coming down the hill, dust kicking up behind them. Their coats long, their faces half covered in scarves. He didn't need to ask, one look and he knew. Briggs' men. The rancher's stomach tightened. It had been years since he'd held a gun for anything more than a coyote. But this wasn't about him. Not anymore. They rode in slow, confident, like they already owned the place. The man in front, tall, broad, eyes cold as iron, raised a hand. The others stopped behind him. "Mornin'," he called out. His voice was smooth, too easy. "We're lookin' for a lady passed through here last night. Might have been hurt. You seen her?" The rancher stepped forward, resting his hand near the rifle leaning by the porch. "Ain't seen no lady," he said flatly. The tall man smiled. "That's so. Funny thing, her horse turned up dead 10 miles back. No tracks after that. Figured she might have found herself some company." "I don't keep company," the rancher said. "Yeah," the man chuckled, "I can see that." He looked around slowly, eyes scanning the barn, the corral, the porch. "Mind if we take a look around?" "I do," the rancher replied. The smile faded. "Now that don't sound friendly." "Wasn't meant to." For a moment nobody moved. The only sound was the creak of leather and the soft snort of the horses. Then behind the trough, a soft click, metal against metal. The man's gaze snapped that way. Too late. The crack of her rifle split the air. One rider fell before he could even draw. The rest scrambled for cover, shouting, firing wild shots toward the barn. The rancher dove behind the water trough beside her, bullets kicking up dust around them. "You couldn't wait 2 seconds, could you?" he muttered. "You were buying time," she said, reloading. "I just spent it." He smirked despite the chaos. The old part of him, the one that had fought, that had lost, woke up again. He took aim, fired once, and another man dropped from his horse. The rest turned tail, riding off toward the ridge, but the tall man didn't move. He sat there calm as stone, eyes fixed on the porch. "That's Briggs," she said, her voice low. He holstered his gun, sliding down from the saddle. "You can't hide forever," he said, his voice carrying across the still air. "You think one ranch and one washed-up cowboy's gonna stop me?" The rancher raised his rifle. "You can find out if you like." Briggs smiled, slow and cruel. "You don't even know what she's done." "Don't matter," the rancher said. Briggs tilted his head. "Then you'll die for nothing." The woman's hand brushed the pouch again. Her pulse pounded so loud she could hear it. The rancher didn't look at her, but he felt her fear like it was his own. He kept his eyes on Briggs, finger steady on the trigger. For a long moment, no one moved. The world held its breath again, just like the night before. Then Briggs stepped closer, and the sun caught the metal of his gun. The air between them turned heavy, electric. The rancher's hand tightened. He'd lived through years of silence, but this was the first time it felt alive. The wind picked up again, carrying the smell of dust and gunpowder. The horses shifted restlessly, their eyes rolling white. The rancher could feel the tension in the air, thick and brittle like glass ready to break. Briggs stood a few paces away, calm, too calm for a man staring down the barrel of a rifle. His hand rested near his revolver, but he didn't draw. He just smiled, that slow, cruel kind of smile that said he'd done this 100 times and always walked away standing. "You got guts, old man," Briggs said. His voice carried easy, smooth as oil. "But you don't know what you're getting yourself into." "I know enough," the rancher replied, his tone low, steady. Briggs tilted his head. "Do you? She tell you what she did?" The woman stayed low behind the trough, her rifle ready, eyes fixed on Briggs. He glanced her way, his grin widening. "There she is, the marshal's little shadow. You got a lot of people looking for you, sweetheart." She didn't answer. The rancher saw her jaw tighten, the faint tremor in her hand. Briggs noticed too. "What's in that pouch, huh?" he called. "Something worth dying for. You think the law's gonna care once you're in the ground?" The rancher's patience snapped. "You talk too much," Briggs laughed softly. "Maybe, but I'm still the one talking." The sound of metal broke the moment, the cock of the rancher's rifle. Briggs' smile vanished. "You really want to do this," he said. The rancher didn't blink. "You're on my land. You made the choice." The air split open with the first shot. Dust burst from the ground near Briggs' boots as he dove for cover behind his horse. Two of his men, who'd circled back down the ridge, opened fire from the flank. Bullets tore through the fence, splinters flying. The woman rolled to the side, firing twice in quick succession. One of the men fell. The other ducked behind the water tank, cursing. The rancher moved like a man who'd done this before, precise, silent, efficient. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to protect. Every shot he took, every move he made was measured, meant to keep them away from her. Briggs shouted over the gunfire, "You think you can hide her? You're just another fool in her way." The rancher didn't answer. He fired again, the recoil jarring through his shoulder. He could feel the years in his bones, the strain in his breath. But he kept going. Then silence, the kind that comes after chaos when even the wind seems scared to move. Smoke hung low across the yard. The horses were gone, scattered into the hills. Briggs was nowhere in sight. He stood slowly, rifle still raised. "You see him," he called out. The woman scanned the edge of the corral, eyes sharp. "No, but he's not gone." He turned just as the door to the barn creaked. Briggs stepped out from the shadows, a pistol in one hand, the other gripping a lantern. The flame flickered dangerously close to the wall of hay. "Put it down," the rancher warned. Briggs smirked. "You shoot me, we all burn." The woman shifted her aim, but he swung the lantern higher, the firelight catching his face. "That's it, stay still, hand me the pouch." Her voice was cold. "You'll have to kill me first." He grinned. "That was always the plan." The rancher saw it before she did, the faint shimmer of oil spilled near the barn door. Briggs had planned it. One throw, one spark, and everything would go up. He took a step forward, careful, his eyes locked on the flame. "Don't," he said. Briggs turned to him, eyes narrowing. "You think she's worth it? You don't even know her name." "Don't need to," the rancher said. Briggs laughed, the sound dry and mean. "Then die for a stranger." The lantern moved, a flash of orange light arcing through the air. The rancher didn't think. He dropped his rifle and lunged, catching it mid-flight before it shattered on the ground. The heat seared his hands, but he tossed it aside, rolling as the fire licked across the dirt. The woman fired. Briggs stumbled, clutching his shoulder, and dropped his gun. She ran forward, kicking it away. He fell to his knees, bleeding but still smiling. "You think this changes anything?" he rasped. "There'll be more. Men like me don't die easy." She stood over him, breathing hard, gun still pointed. "Then let's make it harder." Briggs looked up at her, his grin fading. "You've got no idea what kind of world you're fighting." She didn't answer. The silence between them said enough. The rancher rose slowly, brushing the dirt from his coat. His palms were burned, his breathing ragged, but his eyes stayed calm. "You done?" he asked. Briggs stared at him, blood running down his arm. "You could have stayed out of this." "Yeah," the rancher said. "But I didn't." Briggs laughed once, a dry, broken sound, and then the light left his eyes. For a moment, everything was still again. No voices, no movement. Just the faint crackle of the dying fire and the heavy breathing of two people who'd seen too much. The woman lowered her gun slowly. Her hands were steady, but her eyes shimmered in the early light. He looked at her, his voice rough. "You all right?" she nodded. "I will be." He glanced toward the horizon. The sun had broken fully now, spreading light over the land, over the scars in the dirt, over the blood soaking into the soil. It was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. The woman reached for the pouch, holding it tight to her chest. The weight of it seemed heavier now, but not from fear, from purpose. He wanted to say something, maybe to tell her to go, maybe to tell her to stay, but no words came. The moment didn't need them. She met his eyes, a faint, tired smile breaking through. "You didn't have to help me," she said. "I know." "Then why did you?" He thought about it. About the years alone, the emptiness that no amount of work could fill. About the look in her eyes when she first said those words, "Wait." "I take it off." "Because," he said quietly, "you reminded me I'm still alive." She didn't look away. The light caught the edge of her face, soft and warm. The world around them was broken and beautiful all at once. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone in it. The world felt different once the dust settled. The gunfire had stopped, the shouting gone, and all that was left was the sound of the wind moving through the dry grass. The rancher stood still for a long time, letting the quiet return. He could feel the ache in his shoulders, the sting on his burned palms, the weight of what had just happened. But he also felt something else, a strange calm. The kind that comes after chaos, when you've done what needed doing and there's nothing left to question. Briggs lay motionless by the barn, the morning light stretching over him. The woman knelt beside the trough, wiping the dust and blood from her hands. Her breathing was slow, steady. She wasn't shaking anymore. The rancher watched her for a moment, the way she moved with quiet strength, the way her eyes stayed sharp even when tired. She had fought like someone who'd been running her whole life. Now, for the first time, she looked like she didn't have to. He turned toward the horizon. The sun had climbed higher, painting the plains gold. The air smelled like ash and iron. The ranch was still standing, but the fence was torn. The barn door splintered, and the dirt was marked with the story of what they'd both survived. He wasn't sure if it was over or if it had just begun. The woman rose slowly, brushing off her coat. She glanced toward Briggs' body, then at the pouch in her hand. The leather was dark with dust and blood. "I should go," she said. Her voice was soft but firm. He nodded once. "Town's 2 days east if you cut through the ridge." "I know." She looked at him, her eyes catching the light. "You don't have to stay, they'll come back for him." "I figured," he said. She frowned slightly. "Then why aren't you leaving?" He took a long breath before answering. "Because this is my land, my home. I've run enough in my life." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward now, it was something else. Something that said more than words ever could. She stepped closer, her boots crunching on the dry dirt. "You could have let me die out here," she said. "Most men would have." "Maybe," he said. "But most men don't sleep well after." A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't much, but it was real. "You ever think about leaving this place?" He looked around the house, the corral, the endless stretch of land. Every inch of it was built by his own hands, held together by sweat and habit. "I did once," he said. "A long time ago. Then I realized there's nowhere to go that's far enough from yourself." She nodded slowly, understanding more than he said. "You sound like someone who's seen too much." He met her eyes. "You sound like someone who ain't done seeing it." She looked down at the pouch again. "I'll need to get this to Dodge. If the marshal still runs things there, it'll be enough to end Briggs' whole outfit. Maybe clean the rot out." "Maybe," he said, "but the rot always grows back somewhere." "I know," she said. "That's why people like me have to keep cutting it out." He respected that, the fire that hadn't burned out even after everything she'd lost. Most people would have quit long ago. But she was different. The horses had come back by now, lingering near the fence, nervous but calm. He walked to one, patted its neck, and checked the saddle. "Take this one," he said. "Strong, fast, doesn't spook easy." She hesitated. "You'll need it." "I'll manage," he said simply. She looked at him like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words, so she didn't. She took the reins, adjusted the stirrup, then turned toward him one last time. "I meant what I said," she told him quietly. "You saved my life." He shook his head. "You saved it yourself, I just gave it room." The wind picked up again, tugging at her coat. She placed the pouch carefully inside her saddlebag, then mounted up. The horse snorted, pawing at the ground. She turned east, toward the rising light. For a moment he thought she would ride off without looking back. But she stopped at the edge of the fence, twisted slightly in the saddle, and met his gaze across the field. "You ever find yourself in Dodge," she said, "look for me at the marshal's office. Ask for Clara." "Clara," he repeated softly. She gave a single nod. "Don't forget it." Then she kicked the horse lightly, and the sound of hooves carried her away, steady, fading, until it was just the wind again. The rancher stood there long after she disappeared from sight. The world felt quiet but not empty. The same land, the same sky, yet somehow everything had shifted. He walked back toward the house, passing the trough where she'd first stood, the spot where she'd said those strange words that started it all. "Wait, I take it off." He hadn't understood them then. But now, as he stood alone under the open sky, he finally did. It wasn't about her coat or disguise or even the badge she carried. It was about something deeper, the moment she stopped hiding from who she was. The moment she shed everything that chained her to the past. He ran his hand along the gate, the same one he'd leaned on when he first saw her coming through the heat and dust. The boards were cracked, one nail bent, but it still stood. Maybe that was enough. Inside the barn, the scent of smoke lingered, mixed with the iron of blood and the faint sweetness of hay. He'd have to fix the door, mend the fence, dig a grave out by the ridge. Work that would take days. But for once he didn't mind. He took a seat on the porch, poured the last of the coffee, and watched the sun climb higher. The land stretched wide before him, endless and untamed, just like it always had been. Only now it didn't feel like a prison. It felt alive again. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, circling high above the fields. He followed it with his eyes until it vanished into the light. Then he leaned back, let out a long breath, and for the first time in years he felt something close to peace. He didn't know if he'd ever see Clara again. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. But her voice stayed with him, soft, certain, unafraid. "Wait, I take it off." And as the wind moved across the plains, whispering through the dry grass, he realized those words had changed more than her life. They'd changed his too.